So let me welcome you all as you settle in. It's lovely to see such a great turnout and to see so many of our fellows and friends and affiliates here. My name is Jonathan Laurence. I'm director of the Clough Center for the Study of Constitutional Democracy and a professor of political science at Boston College. My 20th year here. And as you know, this year we have been featuring for our annual theme, democratic resilience. And we held our fall colloquium on that topic, which you can find in full on YouTube. That occasion, as well as this, is taking place with the co-sponsorship and support of the Global Ethics and Social Trust Program, which is led by, in part by Eric Owens, the Director of International Studies. So let me express my thanks to that program for their support. So, democratic resilience. We have been focusing our attention in large part on how democracies survive, how they adapt, how they change, and given recent developments in several of the longer-lasting democracies, we've naturally been led to examine cases of backsliding and de-democratization. But not so long ago, we also had high expectations for the continuing expansion of democracy, including in areas of the world with limited experience in broad contestation and/or political participation. So I'm very pleased to welcome you here today for a discussion of a very important topic that deserves greater attention. You can see here the region that we will be examining today, of North Africa. It's a region rife with potential. 230 million people living at a crossroads of European, Arab, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Berber cultures, and much more linguistically and ethnically and religiously, with centuries of experience of ethnic and religious diversity, with esteemed traditions of universities for centuries, and with a vast reservoir of human capital. The countries of North Africa can be counted in different ways, but Egypt, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, and sometimes also Mauritania is included, or Sudan is included, are today organized as either semi-presidential or presidential republics, or in the case of Morocco, as a constitutional monarchy. But they all refer to themselves as democracies, and they all hold regular elections. Nonetheless, the populations have limited electoral options and lesser enjoyment of the rights and freedoms associated with liberal constitutional democracy that would make those elections more meaningful. So why has this region, despite periods of hope, remained immune to successive waves of democratization? Well, one answer surely lies in the recent history of colonialism and the manner in which European empires ruled by themselves or by proxy, and/or the coalition in power when that rule came to an end, or that brought European colonialism to an end in each country. So the European withdrawal from North Africa was mostly complete by around 60 years ago. Early 1960s, when the last troops and viceroys and consuls from Great Britain, France, Italy left Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. And these same places, of course, had spent centuries under Ottoman rule or protection before that. So, finally, under self-rule, the post-colonial regimes of the late 20th century were distinctive for two things: economic modernization and secularization, often carried out quite harshly. But during the Cold War, geopolitical incentives prized stability above all. Some of these countries sought economic and diplomatic integration into the Western Bloc with the European Community or the United States. Others remained unaligned or in Moscow's sphere of influence. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall and 9/11, right, so that the end of that parenthesis, it seemed like finally the obstacles of colonialism and the Cold War could finally be surmounted and left behind. And thus, in the 21st century, the region began to come into its own. Two periods of hope stand out. The first was around 20 years ago, in 2005, during the early days of the second presidential term of George W. Bush. So ideas that had been circulating in some conservative think tanks in the early days of the Bush presidency were finally given their moment in the sun. So when asking why the region had generated religious radicalization, the absence of democracy was frequently singled out. There were, however, of course, many other hypotheses worth exploring, but democracy became a kind of lowest common denominator to remake a region in a more friendly image at a moment when the US still stood at the apex of its power. But the American determination to lower the pressure in these pressure cookers took on genuine real-life form, and the United States wound up dedicating huge resources to these ends, in both blood and treasure, as the saying goes, towards democratization in the greater Middle East and also in North Africa. So we know that in Iraq and Afghanistan, this agenda was pursued through regime change, the spread of democracy through the use of force. And in 2005, it seemed like the US invasion and democratization of Iraq and democratic rule there might have a domino effect. But US foreign policy towards North Africa took a very different form. Right? It offered foreign aid and soft power and aimed to promote democratic movements and actors and NGOs. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice traveled to Cairo and across the Maghreb. Now, it may be true that the Pentagon's marching band is funded around, more than even the Foreign Service Officer Corps, and it may be true that the amount of foreign aid dedicated to democratization in the Middle East and North Africa was only in the hundreds of millions rather than the hundreds of billions, but there were still $100 million or more each year going to support a strong civil society, literacy efforts, women's rights, access to elections, notably through something called the Middle East Partnership Initiative, which was led at the time by Liz Cheney. So some of those that were supported by the United States may have well been doomed by their association with us, but that assistance also helped others to survive. And others yet have simply maintained their own momentum through their own grassroots legitimacy, their own philosophical or ideological underpinnings. And that brings us to the second period of hope that came in the early 2010s and its aftermath, which is what we're going to hear about largely today. And so I'm referring, of course, to the Jasmine Revolution, the Arab Spring, the February 20th movement, and the Haraka, and so much else that we will hear about today, and the hopes and disappointments that followed, and the quest for democracy that is still ongoing. So to guide our discussion today, we will hear from two international figures with deep scholarly and practical experience. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Dr. Youssef Chahed, the former Prime Minister of Tunisia, where he served from August 2016 to February 2020. Throughout the Tunisian democratic transition, he advocated for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, other civil liberties, and during his time in office, he passed several momentous laws against violence against women and towards the mitigation of racial discrimination. He was also the first Tunisian leader to launch both an anti-corruption and an anti-terrorism campaign while navigating severe fiscal and economic challenges. And he was also the youngest Tunisian prime minister and the longest serving since Tunisia's democratic transition. Currently, he is a senior fellow with the Clough Center this year, and he's been an active presence focusing on economic and security challenges. We're very honored that he is with us today. He will be speaking second, whereas first to present will be my friend and colleague, Professor Mohammed Hashas. And we are also very pleased to welcome back to the Clough Center. Professor Hashas is a prominent scholar of modern and contemporary Islamic thought and a professor of political science at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, in the Department of History, Humanities, and Society. Prior to joining that faculty, he taught at Luis University in Rome, and he has also served as a research fellow at many think tanks and centers around Europe. He's the author of several books, but his most recent publication, which I will just bring your attention to, is Contemporary Moroccan Thought, which is a major contribution to intellectual history. This is a compilation of essays from prominent Moroccan philosophers, theologians, sociologists, and anthropologists on a wide range of subjects ranging from international relations to literary cultural studies and theology. And it is prefaced with a lengthy introductory essay that contextualizes the whole volume and is really a book unto itself. So please join me in welcoming my two esteemed colleagues, and thank you for being here.